Preface to the Art of Landscape Painting in Oil Color by Alfred East. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sue Anderson. The Art of Landscape Painting in Oil Color by Alfred East. Preface. It will be found that I have not attempted in these pages to write at any length on the art of landscape painting in its elementary stages. I have taken it for granted that the reader has at least a practical knowledge of the rudiments of drawing, such as may be acquired at any school of art. It is, of course, an absolute necessity that such should be the case before any attempt is made to paint from nature. My aim, therefore, has been to place before the student certain considerations which do not find a place in the curriculum of our art schools, and which should be of assistance to him in the progress of his development. I am of opinion that the cause of a great many of the failures amongst those who know something of the technique of painting is their false attitude towards nature. No matter how closely they may seek to imitate her, their work lacks the vitality which is always associated with that of a master. Therefore, while I shall not neglect the necessary hints on the technicalities of art, my chief endeavor will be to point out the best methods of employing one's knowledge. However well grounded the student may be in technical ability, he may yet be a complete failure as an artist. Beyond the methods of painting there lies the wider problem of the real expression of art. A boy learns at school the conventional rules of arithmetic, and in after life he probably discovers for himself a system of reckoning which is better suited to his purpose. But had he not first learned the fundamental rules, his own system could not have been so easily evolved. So it is with painting. Technique is of the highest importance. The artist should be able to draw with his brush as easily as a writer uses his pen. Assuming then that the student is adequately equipped with technical knowledge, my desire is to present to him ideas and suggestions which will lead him to search for the why and wherefore of things which may have hitherto escaped his attention. Such thoughts and suggestions will, I trust, gradually widen his outlook, give a larger interest to his work, and endow it with qualities which will mark it as a result of honest personal conviction, an expression of his individuality and character. The striving after such an end as this will increase his enthusiasm for his work, quicken his powers of observation, and help him to look beyond mere superficialities. All these qualities are necessary to the landscape painter, and in their possession he will find a sure reward. If the student can be induced to study nature in her broader aspects and to grasp her higher attributes, which must be present in all art, he will probably before long discover the methods by which he can best express what he finds in the world about him. There is a curious belief abroad that art is a trick, a species of cleverness, to which anyone may attain by mere practice and perseverance, that success would be assured if one could only secure the confidence of some eminent painter and learn his secret, his peculiar trick of the trade. So considerable an amount of unsatisfactory matter has been printed on the subject of landscape painting that it is probable that the student, if he forms any opinion at all, may decide upon a very erroneous one. The fact that landscape painting is such a personal expression and receives such varied treatment at the hands of its exponents is partly responsible for this error of judgment. The student, puzzled by so many different methods of expressing nature, finds considerable difficulty in tracing the underlying principles by which all are governed. For instance, he may look at a Claude or a Poussin and then at a Turner or a Corot, and find certain principles in the one which appear to be ignored in the other. I have it on the highest authority, he may reason with himself, that all these artists are great. But how can that be? In his ignorance he cannot understand that while Claude and Poussin may be right in their precision, Turner and Corot may also be right in their mysterious generalization. I can imagine such a student discovering in a great picture some quality which he takes to be a fundamental principle of art, and in the joy of that discovery he may turn to the work of another master, one of a different school, expecting to find that same quality there. But alas, he seeks in vain. The principle as he thought it to be is not universal, and in his perplexity he flounders, not knowing where to find a sure basis on which to rest his theories. He may examine the method of Turner, which he will find more subtle and elusive than that of Claude. He may endeavour to discover how it is that which looks nothing but a daub at close quarters grows into life and being when seen from a distance. He may make notes, analyse and copy the pictures, and yet remain altogether ignorant of the great qualities the artist has expressed. The problem grows more and more complex, more and more contradictory, and his mind is in confusion. In trying to judge the work of one artist by a standard which he thought had been established by an equally great artist, and therefore trustworthy, he has come to grief. The masterpieces of musical composition by the exponents of that art are widely different in motif and construction, but they are similar in their adherence to the fundamental principles that govern the art of music. So in like manner the varied expressions of landscape art are reconciled in the principles underlying the works of the masters I have mentioned. There is yet another danger in studying the letter rather than the spirit of the works of great masters. A student, having discovered to his own satisfaction their technical methods and noted all the peculiarities of their work, may at length find himself looking at nature through their spectacles. It may seem strange, yet nevertheless it is possible for a man with a mind so biased and influenced to approach nature and see anything in her that he is predisposed to. If he looks for the leaves of a tree carefully arranged in the style of the old masters, he can see them. He may even go so far as to discover their repetition, and the peculiarly affected contours of the branches against the sky. In short, he may become a slave, and sacrifice his own powers of direct perception to his faith in these formalisms. Eventually he will see nature entirely through other eyes than his own. But there is one point upon which I would insist, that is, that the conception of the truth and beauty of nature is not the exclusive possession of one painter, however great he may be. Nature is too boundless in her variations for all her truth to be grasped by one mind. There are aspects that are revealed by Poussin and Claude and others which elude them, but which Turner and Corot turn to such glorious account. These painters took from nature just exactly what they wanted for the due expression of their feeling in art, and nature has some message, some charm, some revelation for each individual, if he has but the eye to see and the hand to record it. Believe me, whatever fault one may find in a work of art, the blame cannot lie with nature. The greatest errors in landscape painting are to be found, contradictory as it may appear, not so much in the matter of technique as in the painter's attitude towards nature. If he be a realist, nature spreads out before him the most wonderful objects, whose beauty is revealed by their faithful delineation. If he be a romanticist, she furnishes again just the special qualities that appeal primarily to his heart. So I would point out to the student the manner in which to study nature, how to look for what he wants, and at the same time impress upon him the responsibility that lies in the selection of material. As I said before, nature is so bountiful that the poverty of a man's work can never be due to lack of material, but is rather owing to his incapacity to select judiciously from her generous offering. While acknowledging our debt to the past, no true artist will be content to rely unquestionably upon previous authorities, nor allow himself to be unduly biased in his judgment by the influence of their works, however fine. No, it is for every man to work out his own salvation in art, and to be prepared to accept the full responsibility for his work. He must tread his path in a spirit of fearlessness and confidence, yet with humility, assured that nature is for him and his particular use. Problems there are still to be solved, and he must solve them for himself in accordance with his own ideas. To imitate and to copy is the result only of the small-minded man. He may not be fully conscious of his servile attitude towards those he holds in high respect, but his lack of creative power is an evidence of the overbearing influence their work has upon him. The student's aim should be to emulate the great masters in the spirit of their work, to strive after their independence of outlook and their high standard of craftsmanship. If nature does not suggest to him those higher qualities that are always present in a great work, then the student may rest assured that his vocation in life is not that of a landscape painter. There is no royal road in art. In this department of life, as in every other, the student must serve before he can govern. He must learn to construct, to draw, to paint, to observe, and select. And it is only by close application and increasing perseverance that he can achieve anything worthy. The stamp of personal purpose must manifest itself in order to make his art distinctive, a purpose that raises his work above that of his fellows in spite of the similar course of training through which they have passed. My object, then, in the following pages is to help the student to see with his own eyes the things that are essential to his purpose. Nature has so much to offer that her very generosity may prove a snare, since there is a danger of wasting time and labor in the selection of non-essentials, for that which does not help is a positive hindrance. My knowledge of the difficulties that beset the path of landscape painters may enable me to be of some service, but of this I am certain, that to those who, with patience, with minds free from bias and prejudice, determine to become masters, to them will come the pleasure and the ability of expressing their love of nature in a language that is perhaps the most beautiful mode of human expression, that of landscape painting. End of preface. Chapter 1 of The Art of Landscape Painting in Oil Color by Alfred East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 1 Attitude Towards Nature. Your attitude towards nature should be respectful, but at the same time confident. One should love nature without giving up one's authority. Do not grovel before nature. Be a man. Stand to your work, and draw and paint from your shoulder in a confident and manly fashion, feeling that you know what you want, and go for it fearlessly, with a keen observation of nature. Look long at her, consider carefully, and then, when you have made up your mind, express it confidently and in a manly fashion. Do not go to your work as a task, but as a labor of love. One can detect at once the work the painter attempted with an immature knowledge of nature. It is not confident and spontaneous, and if he gets, after great labor, something approaching what he wanted, the evidence of his fatigue is apparent. There is no fatigue in nature. Nature expresses life with a curious and interesting sense of directness. Although we know there are millions of years behind her simplest developments, yet the result is one of apparent ease, a spontaneous and direct effort. So should your art be, and it is in this respect it should resemble nature, revealing an infinitely higher quality than the mere imitation of her surface. Paint as if you had the authority of a man, as though all nature was made for your use, to be at your disposal. Respect the power which lies behind nature, and if you respect that, it should keep you from the abuse of nature, and should bring you into closer touch with the great purpose of its being. Build up your picture from the broad masses. Don't finish your trees or your sky or your distance first. Work on them all at the same time, keeping them in tone like an orchestra. Keep them all in hand like a musical conductor. Have no false notes, no discordant line or color. Keep in mind that you must not be ruled or unduly governed by what you see in art, but by what you see in nature. Don't form altogether your ideas of art from pictures, but from nature. That is your business. The value of tradition in art is a question we will not discuss here. It is sufficient for one to get into touch with nature and be in the most intimate sympathy with her. Take every means in your power of learning more of her, and her methods of work, and her possibilities of expression. Learn all about her, what she will do under any and every effect. You will not succeed in finding out all the possibilities of her expression of beauty in her many moods, but you will, in the course of time, know a great deal that will be helpful. For instance, in taking the trouble to paint a sky every morning at the same hour for a few weeks, no matter what the sky is, at the end of the time you have learned something more of the sky than you can read in the latest scientific book, and so of other things. I also find that if I draw a tree every day for a month, I have gained some knowledge of the peculiar characteristics of trees that had escaped my observation before, and it is of no use knowing the names of the bones and muscles of the body unless you know what they will do in action. One ought to know a tree so well that one can alter its form to suit the purpose of one's composition without the slightest loss of its characteristics. Just as a figure painter should know anatomy so well that he can put his figure in action without a model with as much ease as he could draw it in repose. This knowledge gives one confidence and authority, or shall I call it faith in oneself. If you desire to transpose your trees, for instance, to put in some that are growing outside the area you have selected to paint, if you feel that such are necessary for the composition of your picture, you have as much right to put them there as the yokel who planted them where they are growing some 50 years before. But you have not the right to do so if you do not know sufficient of their characteristics. You will be found out, for they will look as if they were artificially put in. But if you know them well enough, their requirements of soil and situation, as well as their construction and character, they will be right. My point is, get knowledge. Find out first the why and the wherefore of all things. The greater the knowledge of nature, the simpler and stronger will be your work. You may take up the interesting study of reflection, or the study of the color of shadows. You may note the form of shadows, the differences of their forms in proportion to the distance from the objects on which they are thrown. You may see that in one case the interstices of the trees are rounded like a photograph out of focus. At another time they are sharp like a Japanese stencil, clearly cut and of a beautiful pattern. You may note the interesting difference of color of the landscape during the progress of the day. You may note 1,000 valuable facts. There is no harm in studying the reflections in a dewdrop. They are very wonderful and beautiful. But don't do it till you learn more of the earth and sky. The little bits of nature are very interesting, but your business is to do with big things, to grasp with a strong hand the great essentials for your work. You are to build up your landscape with the best of the beautiful materials you can find, not to be led aside from your great purpose by the little things that are not wanted, even if they are beautiful. Go forward in the world with a purpose, a great purpose. You are responsible for your work done, and you only. The material is right. Nature is as kind to you as she was to Shakespeare. If there is a fault or failure, do not be so mean as to suggest that it was due to nature. Shakespeare does not tell you what buttons were on the coat of Hamlet, but he does reveal to you the secret of his character. We do not want the buttons and the braid and all the stage properties. We want the living, sentient man, his place in life, which makes history. And so with you. You do not want the pretty little things of nature. You want the big, strong essentials which stir the heart of man and show that you have felt and seen them and can reveal them to others. Strong men are working in other fields of thought for you, and they look to you for your part to be done well, as you expect the best from them. The architect does not blame his stone. He may build from the same quarry as St. Paul's, and yet the building may be beneath contempt, and so you must know that there is no excuse for you. Nature is for you, as it was for all men, and if you know it as well as the great who have gone, you will be able to tell us something new, as they did, even if it be different. Again, let me impress upon you to approach your work in a manly, confident spirit. Be not ashamed to do the drudgery of constant practice at drawing or sketching. Learn to serve and keep awake. Have your eyes and your heart open, always working. Keep your picture together, a touch here, a touch there. Whatever you can correct, do so. Here a touch in the sky, there one in the foreground, another in the middle distance. Build up your entire picture as one great whole, one intention, not in patches of separate interests, but all tending to one purpose and one only, every part being interdependent upon another, that the whole should be sure and certain, as confident as a sketch, and as spontaneous as nature. There should be no sense of fatigue. It should appear as if it were simply and easily done. You may have sweated at it. You may have given it weeks of thought, both by day and night. You may have groaned and writhed in the deepest anxiety, yet the result should be as simple and direct as a beautiful sonnet. That shows your conquest. No more, no less is wanted. You have secured what you wanted, and it is finished. If you have no enthusiasm and lack courage, stay at home and do other work that befits your temperament. A landscape painter must have enthusiasm, and no shame in speaking of the pleasure he feels in his work. I think it is useful to speak about what interests you most, but be quite sure that you have the sympathy of the person to whom you speak. You need not be ashamed of your calling, for if you knew the innermost feelings of the hearts of others, you might find that you are envied by those who cannot purchase the pleasure you have in following the calling you love best in life. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Art of Landscape Painting in Oil Color by Alfred East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2, Equipment. In the selection of your equipment, you must bear in mind that comfort and usefulness are of the greatest importance. The art is difficult enough without the additional drawbacks incurred by bad materials and inconvenient camp stools and easels. A camp stool that is uncomfortable and that causes one to sit in a cramped position, or occasions a constant and distracting sense of its insecurity, is an unnecessary evil, and one should also avoid an easel that requires a great deal of fixing and arouses nervousness at every puff of wind. Nothing whatever in your apparatus should withdraw your mind from your work. Your whole attention is demanded in the production of a successful sketch. What can be more annoying when one is striving to take full advantage of a passing effect, say of a distant rain cloud on a mountainside, if at the very moment a sudden squall overturns your easel and you find your sketch face downwards on the ground, and this simply because you have an ill-constructed easel. An easel for outdoor sketching should combine the qualities of lightness and stability. If both cannot be secured, then by all means sacrifice the lightness, not the stability. For many years I have used a rack easel revolving on a ball and socket joint and stiffened at the desired angle by a thumb screw. The legs are telescopic and can be shortened or lengthened to suit any irregularity of ground, and can be opened at so wide an angle as to render a sudden overturn by the breeze impossible. The rack can be so arranged that your picture can stand perfectly upright and firm, a very great advantage when painting in oil, as the reflection of the sky on the wet paint always creates a difficulty. As an easel for watercolor work it is admirable. A rack moving on a ball and socket joint can be pulled over into a horizontal position, which enables the color to dry flat and prevents it running down, as so often happens when the ordinary upright position is maintained. The only fault possessed by this easel is that, in spite of its light weight, it is somewhat unportable. This, however, is only an objection when you are packing your things for a journey, and it can be overcome by taking the easel to pieces, and as the parts are fastened by brass thumb screws, the process need not be a labor. I have taken such an easel to many countries, and used it under all conditions, and found it excellent. Of course it will not hold a larger canvas than the extent of the rack, unless you take the trouble to put two large screw eyes into your canvas strainer which will grip the rack behind. This device can be dispensed with if you are provided with a hook easel, which for large canvases cannot be excelled. This easel is so well known that it's scarcely worth while for me to describe it. As, however, this book may fall into the hands of someone who has not seen or used the apparatus, a few words of explanation will not be out of place. Briefly described, it consists of 3 poles of 7 feet long and about 1½ inches in diameter, and 5 screw eyes large enough to admit the poles. These screw eyes are screwed into the back of the canvas stretcher and so form of themselves an easel. A small thumb screw fixes the screw eye on the poles at the elevation required. One screw eye is hinged for the back pole. The advantage of this easel is that it will firmly support any sized canvas up to 6 feet or more, and by the addition of another ring and pole it may be made to resist half a gale of wind when a guy rope from the back pole screwed into the earth prevents it being blown over from behind. You can raise or lower the picture at will, and it can be placed at any angle on irregular ground. I have spoken of the necessity of comfort in painting, and you may be assured that an easy seat is of the highest importance for both health and work. How many students complain of indigestion caused by the cramping of the stomach resulting from the use of a low stool. It should be as high as an ordinary chair, or at least as high as any seat you usually feel at ease in. To my mind, nothing is better than the tripod with a strong oxhide top, which, while you are out in the country, can be temporarily fixed by a tack to the stool underneath. This plan prevents loss of time and trouble in adjusting the seat every time it is used. Now, as to the canvas upon which you are to paint your picture, there are many opinions as to which is the most suitable, most of them formed by artists who get into the habit of using one kind. For instance, some prefer a coarse canvas, and others choose a very fine texture. I think the best is a medium grain, which will not show disagreeably the texture of the linen when painted, and which is not too absorbent. It is better white, since it is quite an easy matter to give it a wash with spirits of turpentine, in which a little burnt sienna is mixed to tone it to a softer tint. The turpentine also gives the surface a pleasanter tooth or surface to work upon, and takes away the oily and shiny appearance. Some prefer a half primed canvas, that is, one with less preparation upon it. This is very agreeable, but it requires a richer body of paint than the more fully primed, and there is less danger of subsequent cracking. I have used many kinds, but the most agreeable is that which I have prepared myself, more or less after the manner of the old masters, and it may be worth while to supply a brief description of the process. First you strain the best linen sailcloth of moderately fine texture over your strainer, then give it 2 coats of thin size. It is advisable afterwards to sterilize the size with a wash of solution of formalin. This prevents the formation of fungi by the action of the atmosphere on the size, and so prevents the eventual scaling of the paint. The ground preparation which I use is the finest china clay, thoroughly dried in an oven, and the best white lead mixed with bleached linseed oil and spirits of turpentine and a little copal varnish. If you want an absorbent surface, add a spoonful or 2 of water. The first coat is applied when the size is thoroughly dry and smooth. The second is overlaid in the same manner, care being taken to leave no coarse brush marks. It should not be painted on for at least 6 months afterwards. The canvas, treated as I have described, may be put on one side and exposed to the light as far as possible. as darkness always tends to discolor white lead. I believe canvas so prepared is more reliable than any other, and it will support the color without cracking, as happens with preparations of inferior quality. Now we come to the paint box. This should be made of wood thoroughly seasoned, since it has to bear the changes of temperature and moisture. When at work in the morning, if one places the box on the dewy grass, the bottom gets wet and the lid dry, and the shrinkage will prevent its properly closing. In the evening these conditions are reversed, hence the necessity for well-seasoned wood. The ordinary boxes, originally made in France, but now obtainable at any art colourman's, are best. About 15 inches by 12 inches is a good size. It is an advantage if the box has a brass knob on each side to which you can fix a broad strap so as to carry it from the shoulder. It should contain palette, colours, medium, turpentine, and, if space permits, brushes, though if you have not room you can, of course, take a separate brush case. And be sure you do not forget your charcoal and pencil. The medium and turpentine should be in square tin bottles with screw tops and should fit snugly in their allotted places. The box should contain coloured tubes in proportion to your needs. For instance, the largest will be white and the rest will vary according to the demands likely to be made upon them. I mention this because weight is a consideration when one has to carry one's own material, and it often happens that your subjects are a considerable distance from your headquarters, so that you should take only the minimum weight. The colours constituting my palette, together with the sizes of the tubes usually taken in the box, are as follows: Flake white 1/2 pound tube, yellow ochre 1/4 pound, pale cadmium small tube, mid cadmium, deep cadmium, rose madder, burnt sienna, Venetian red, all small tube. Note: the small tubes are suggested to save weight. For studio work larger sizes are better. Raw umber medium tube, cobalt, French blue, viridian, ivory black, medium tube. Vermilion can replace rose madder if desired. These should go into your box comfortably. The palette fits over them, and there is space for the dipper, which should be large enough to receive your largest brushes. The box is generally made to hold several wooden panels, which slip into the groove in the lid. These are useful either for a study of the picture you are painting, or if the effect you desire is not visible at the time, you can do a sketch while you are waiting till it comes on. I have found these wood panels the greatest solace. When you start out in the morning to a subject which may be miles away from headquarters, the day may promise the sunny effect you desire, but just after you have arrived, fixed the easel, made sure of its stability, and added the security of the guy rope, the sun may abruptly conceal itself behind a block of clouds which seems to extend as far back as the eye can reach, and all your preparations appear to be wasted. One experienced in such matters knows how annoying this is. Unfortunately, it is far too common an experience in our uncertain climate, and it is the more vexatious if you have walked some distance to paint a particular shadow across a road, or to correct your colour values by reference to the original conditions under which you started your landscape. This is a crisis where the pencils and panels come in so happily. Instead of tramping back in an evil temper, you can spend the morning in making a study, or doing a sketch under the grey sky which has postponed your larger enterprise. The morning, after all, has not been thrown away. The panel is slipped into the groove of the lid of the box, and one has the satisfaction of feeling nothing has been lost by the change of weather which at first looked like a disaster. It is difficult to give advice in the matter of brushes. Every artist has his own peculiar idea as to their make and shape. Some prefer a round, full brush, others a thin, flat one. Some again like round, thin ones, and others just the opposite. No doubt the pattern of brush must depend mainly upon the nature and method of the work. In the case of those who paint from a generous palette, it is necessary to select brushes that will hold a larger quantity of colour. One's choice must also depend upon whether one uses the colour direct from the tubes without dilution, or whether a greater quantity of oil or other fluid medium is employed. I remember this problem weighing upon the mind of a distinguished lady who was buying her colours with all the difficulties of tree painting confronting her. She inquired if the shopkeeper had any tree brushes. The man was equal to the occasion, for bringing round some brushes, he assured her that they were exactly the same as so and so, mentioning an eminent painter, used in painting landscapes. I beg of you not to get any fads into your head as to any easy or special method of arriving at certain results. There is but one method. It is the familiar and only effective one, namely that of study and hard work. The achievement is not reached by the style of the brush, but through the training of hand, eye, and brain. But though you may not ask for tree brushes, yet you would naturally like to know how trees are painted. They are tiresome and difficult things to paint, I can fancy you saying. Well, they are, but later I will give you a few hints which may help you. Meanwhile, we must have all our materials in order before setting out to work, and not the least important items are the quality and size of your brushes. Let them be of the best, for these are the cheapest in the end. I use a full hog hair brush of a size from 1 to 8, and 1 or 2 small sables, sizes 0 to 2. A few long-haired sables may be convenient for drawing the branches of trees. To each of these sables, and 3 or 4 each of the medium-sized long hair, and 1 or 2 larger ones, will be sufficient. At the end of the day always wash your brushes, either in turpentine or with soap and warm water, or put them in a vessel containing paraffin oil. Now, I have provided you with a camp stool, easel, a box containing colours, medium, spirits of turpentine, and brushes. By the way, I should advise you to use oil copal medium. It is safe and dries well. Note, quick drying poppy oil is excellent, or a medium made of equal parts of spirits of turpentine, linseed oil, and amber or copal varnish is good. Do not forget to take a piece of painting rag. You will find butter muslin, costing about 3d. per yard, excellent for both watercolours and oils, and it is effective for wiping off colour if necessary. To sum up with a few practical hints: put your things right the night before starting. Don't be in a hurry, lest you forget something that is necessary. Be provided for an emergency, such as a change of effect. Don't be too respectful of nature at the beginning, but very much so when finishing. Open your heart and eyes widely. Don't be perverse. Approach nature with the heart of a child. Don't try to be sincere, but be so, and be strong. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Art of Landscape Painting in Oil Color by Alfred East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3, Sketching from Nature. Don't take any makeshifts out when you go sketching. The less you know how to use your tools, the better those tools should be. It is only good workmen who can use bad tools to any purpose, and they choose not to do so. It is the truest economy to use the best materials. It is also a mistake to think that, simply because you are going to sketch, you need not take much with you. The real enjoyment, as well as the success of your sketches, will to a large extent depend on your forethought in this respect. It may be you have walked several miles to sketch a particular subject you had probably seen under a certain effect the day before, when you had no sketching material with you. Full of pleasurable anticipation you start away, thinking how you will treat the subject, whether as an upright or as an oblong, whether the shadow would be better if longer or shorter, or if the distance should be in sunlight or otherwise, and many other considerations which go to make up your anticipated enjoyment. The air is fresh, the clouds sail past in great columns, and at the turn of the road you see your subject. You arrive. Your camp stool is fixed, your easel arranged, and your palette prepared. You carefully draw the outline of your subject, and you feel that the scene is even more beautiful than it appeared the day before when you discovered it. Your pencil outline is done, and you open your box. Alas! Your brushes? You have left them at home. Then one has no proper words adequately to express the situation. There is no rustic available to fetch them, even if you quite knew where you had left them. So there is no alternative but to tramp back. With what different feelings you trudge your way along the road, which now seems so tedious and uninteresting. Now, if you are a wise man, you will at once get a bag and see that all the things required are in it before you start. You may find it necessary to have big brushes when you have only brought small ones, and vice versa. Thus your pleasure as well as your work is spoiled. Be prepared for every emergency. Things which seemed improbable sometimes happen. Another reason is that in making a sketch from nature, your full powers must be put forth. You must be strung up to a high pitch. Every sense must be on the alert, for if you are not keen and quick, you may miss everything. You may miss the particular effect upon which the whole charm of your subject depends, for each sketch should be done at a single sitting. It may be you have for your subject the sweet meadowland of the Midlands of England, across which the shadows of the sailing clouds steal over the cut grass, lighting and relighting the distance, the middle distance, and the wood, at the edge of which nestles a little village. There is nothing amiss with the subject. It expresses the peculiar characteristics of our country. Beautiful as it is in itself, how much lovelier does it seem when seen under the special conditions for which you have patiently waited. Never mind if you have to get out of bed at dawn, it may be worth the effort, or if you have lingered until the white mists have stolen along the flats and your dinner has got cold, it is worth the sacrifice. For remember this important fact: you cannot get a dawn or a sunset repeated in a long experience of careful observation. I have never seen two dawns or two sunsets alike. Unlike history, they never repeat themselves. When you have satisfied yourself under what conditions your subject looks best, when you have risen early, morning after morning, or stayed out till dusk, evening after evening, when you are certain that the very best conditions are before you, then make a start with that courage and confidence without which nothing great is ever achieved. Courage, confidence, and alertness are supreme qualities in sketching from nature. There are many things to be borne in mind which you must keep constantly before you. The progress of the shadows on the hills, which give such a wide foil to your sunlit trees, will not wait for you, and if you glance but for an instant you will see that the sky is clearing to windward, and you may have no more cloud shadows that day. When you start you must allow for the whiteness of your canvas, which by strong contrast may make your work appear too dark. Allow a little, too, for the drying in of your colours. The exact tone of the hillside is more easily obtained, since its effect is more continuous. Then place before it the trees in the exact colour and tone in relation to the sunlight and shadow of the hills. Afterwards note the grass, which is of a more local green, and paint its exact pitch in relation to the preceding tones. The road has its shadows across it. Note the subtle quality within the shadow that suggests the material of the road, for the road material should be recognized as the same under all conditions of light and shade. For instance, a shadow across it must not be like a piece of dark cloth laid down, but a luminous tone, full of the reflection of the sky. Observe that the edges are darker and colder than the general colour of the shadow. You may ask, why not paint the sky first? I know you have been told to do so, and as every painter has a reason for what he does, let me explain why I should not. It is much easier to paint a sky to suit a landscape than a landscape to suit a sky. The frequent cause of so many pictures showing a divided purpose in this respect arises from the unsuitability of the landscape to the sky, or vice versa. You want the sky to belong to the landscape as much as its trees or its fields, and as the cloud forms generally depend upon the existing contours of your composition, they can only be put in after these contours have been arranged. Your business in sketching from nature is to give one a fervid impression of the place, its biggest facts painted in just relation to each other, and its characteristics set down frankly, fearlessly, and in the most direct manner possible. In so far as your sketch endorses the above qualities, it will be good. The moment you begin to hesitate, the moment you begin to neglect the larger facts, you will get wrong with your values. You will lose the sense of spontaneity which is the charm of your sketch. There is, I know, always the temptation to realize the beautiful details of nature, but you can make a careful study of them at your leisure, for you must never sacrifice the big things of your landscape to the details of your sketch. The exact harmony of sky and land, of trees and pasture, of light and shade, of colour and tone, these are the essentials which you must strive to realize, and these are sufficient in all conscience for you to keep in hand without the consideration of the particular forms which make up your foreground and masses. And you will find that your masses will be more correct if treated in this way than if they were niggled to the loss of their general breadth. A sketch may be described as a study, but a study never as a sketch. The sketch deals with the big things, the passing effect of sun and shadow, of storm or rain, of dawn or sunset, and must realize the sense of each particular and peculiar set of conditions pertaining to the various effects. But a study is a faithful drawing or painting of a particular portion of the details which may be useful to you in painting a serious picture, and I shall describe later how both may be brought into one's service for that particular purpose. Now, if you have succeeded in obtaining a sketch which fixes fairly and truthfully the facts of a passing and changing effect, you have done well. You have had to attend to many things. You have worked under great pressure of thought. You have had many irons in the fire, and if you have succeeded in keeping them all hot, every part of your sketch should be equally fervid and spontaneous. Having realized the object of your sketch, you might then, as a relaxation, turn to some of the details, and on a separate piece of canvas make a very careful study of them. Otherwise you would not know them sufficiently to use them in your picture. I have endeavored to point out to you the characteristics of a sketch and a study, and I would like to show you how you should proceed in a practical manner when sketching from nature or in making a study. In addition to their intrinsic interest, sketches reveal the character of the artist even more clearly than his finished pictures. They are, or should be, the vivid expression of his appreciation of nature under a special emotional impulse, and on that account are worthy of preservation. I think more is to be learned from the sketches of a great artist like Turner than from his more elaborated works, where much of his psychological attitude is disguised. I should strongly advise you to study those in the National Gallery. It is better to sketch rapidly, since it is difficult to give the time necessary to the delineation of form under the conditions of changing light. Bear in mind that if we start in the morning, we have shadows from left to right, and in the evening from right to left, and through the intervening hours the shadows are continually modifying the contours of the landscape. We cannot command the sun to stand still or arrest the rain cloud, so we must make the best of our limitations. Since it is so difficult to observe the subtler aspects of nature in the fervent heat of sketching, it is necessary to analyze them and study them separately. It is not only a profitable but a very pleasant pursuit to make pencil drawings of the component parts of the subject one is engaged upon, and thus accumulate a mass of material for the picture of a larger scale. In sketching from nature, do not seek to make incomplete pictures. An unfinished picture is not a sketch, nor has it any value except as practice. In landscape painting there are three stages: the sketch, which aims chiefly at command of colour; the study, which devotes itself to the truth of form; and finally the picture, which unites the fresh impressions of the sketch with the more systematic comprehension of form which is the object of the study. The picture is the end, the others are the means, and the end cannot be attained in the best sense unless you cultivate the discipline of the means. Of course, I do not for one moment suggest that a colour sketch should be devoid of accurate form, but it is necessary, in order to fulfil its purpose as reference in subsequent work, that it should be above all true in its chromatic values, even if false in its form. The form is always with you, whereas colour is transitory. If it be possible to secure both at once, good. but I think you are hardly likely to achieve the complexities of colour while your attention is engaged at the critical moment of the effect on the exactness of form. The general outline may be recorded, but when one is absorbed in the contemplation of colour in Nature, the element of form is perforce very much subordinated. Landscape painting is the realization of inspired conceptions. Some artists are moved by minute details of Nature, others by the wider and bigger attributes. To those who love her, Nature is always responsive. She offers everything you ask. You want the dust and cinders that make up mountains, they are there. Or you want the clouds which mingle with the everlasting fires, they also are there. You may choose the rubble and dirt, or you may choose the peaks which keep company with the heavens. If the painter wishes, he may paint every blade of grass. He enjoys perfect freedom, no law forbids, but he should not particularize his blades of grass in a broad meadow, nor specify the grains of corn in the wide sweep of the harvest field. We know the meadow is covered with tiny blades, but we do not see them individually. We see only the aggregate of their form and colour, and a broad general suggestion is as faithful to Nature as would be a multitude of petty details which we do not see in an ordinary outlook. The suggestion of the fact that the tree is thick with leaves, and that it is living and moving, is infinitely more satisfying to one's sense of truth than would be an immense and painful mass of innumerable and carefully realized leaf units. The goal to strive towards is the living impression of a tree as a whole, as a being, so to speak, and not of a colossal repository of detail. The advice I give you is to draw, as well as to sketch from Nature every day, and slowly but surely you will feel yourself competent enough to start a large canvas, and you will be able, so to speak, to see your picture painted before you touch a brush. Draw the landscape as simply as possible with charcoal, afterwards going over the lines with pencil. Then dust off the charcoal, and you have the drawing left by your pencil. With the confidence which comes after considerable practice, you will be able to dispense with the charcoal and pencil, and start at once with colour. Your paints must be so arranged on your palette that the colour most frequently used is the handiest, that is, white, and then follow the yellows, reds, blues, and greens. It is necessary to have a system in placing your pigments on your palette, as it saves time, and time is of the utmost value when you are rapidly sketching a passing effect. The crucial effect so soon fades, and one's memory loses its acumen so quickly, that you must not trust to it. Therefore you cannot afford to lose time by wandering round your palette for a certain colour. The place of each colour should be known to you as intimately as any note on the keyboard of the piano is to the musician. Use plenty of paint, but not too thin. Do not miss solidity through thinness of colour. A little medium, composed of equal proportions of copal or amber varnish, turpentine, and linseed oil, is helpful. With a brush which holds an ample supply of colour, lay it on your canvas frankly and fearlessly, always remembering that within reasonable limits you can later on correct mistakes. The sky can be painted first with a coat of white, tempered with yellow ochre, and the blue patches of the sky painted into it. Exact tone and colour are as important in sunlit areas as in the space shadowed by the cloud. It is essential to ascertain the difference between the sunshine and the shadow. Having settled what you feel to be the exact difference, place the colours down on your canvas. But if you are not quite sure of the result, wait for another shadow to correct your values. Utilize your cloud shadows for form as well as for colour. The shadow displays the varied contours of the ground over which it falls, and thus affords a valuable aid to perspective. Perhaps the shadow may cross the wood on the hillside and leave the church and cottages in sunshine. You will quickly detect the difference between the trees in shadow and those in light. Fields which were vivid in their rich green in sunshine become more subdued in shadow, though not less luminous. The foreground grass, for which you might have used bright cadmium and transparent oxide of chromium, must now be represented in a combination of yellow ochre and cobalt, or deep cadmium and French blue. Bear in mind that although the colour of the middle distance and extreme distance may be lowered, it must convey, as in nature, the impression that it is composed of exactly the same materials. That is to say, the distant grass must look like grass as distinctly as that in the foreground. There must be no halting to inquire, no hesitation in this assurance. The diminished size of trees, houses, and other familiar objects explain their own distance, but large spaces, as for instance of grass fields on a hillside, depend more upon aerial perspective, the criterion of judgment being in this case a just tone of colour rather than the diminution of individual objects. I have no doubt that you will find the middle distance objects extremely difficult to paint, and I fear many artists use the same colours as in the foreground, merely diluting them by the addition of white, thinking they will thus secure the desired alteration of tone. This is not the case. All the various distances which we describe as middle or remote not only demand a change of actual pigments, but a fresh combination of colour. Thus, while the foreground may consist of the strongest greens, the middle distance may require white, yellow ochre, and blue, and in the far distance rose madder, white, a little yellow ochre or raw umber. Now I would ask you in oil painting not to dilute your colour with oil or medium more than is absolutely necessary for facility in working. This is a fatal error made by so many amateurs when painting from nature. You must learn to master the somewhat stubborn material, and when you have overcome the technical difficulties of the craft, you will find the great advantage of being able to manipulate a fuller body of paint. When you have painted the foreground, the mid-distance, the wood, the light on the church, the village, you have practically completed the sketch with the exception of the sky, and that should harmonise with the structure of the landscape as a whole. The forms of the clouds must preserve a suitable relation and sympathy with your landscape. Their contours must assist the lines of your composition, and their character be in keeping with the effect you have elected to paint. Their scale also must be studied, for it must not lessen the sense of the width of the meadow or the near distance or the distance of the hills. Now you have the opportunity of perfecting your composition. You may put in that little bit of extreme distance which so beautifully melts into your sky, and you will consider whether the pool in the foreground should reflect the white or the blue-grey of the heavens. Do not hurry your sketch now, for the effect you sought after has passed. You cannot improve on the first vivid impression, and though the forms still confront you, you cannot invent the exact relations of color which nature only has the privilege of creating. Leave well alone. Or if you are not pleased with the day's work, repeat the subject tomorrow if the weather is the same, and the experience you have gained will guide and nerve you for your next attempt. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of The Art of Landscape Painting in Oil Color by Alfred East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4, Pencil Drawing from Nature. Before touching a brush, one should make a series of pencil drawings of the subject one afterwards intends to paint. The landscape painter may, after spending many days on a picture, despairingly conclude that the composition is hopeless. The disappointment might have been avoided had he curbed his impatience and executed a series of preparatory drawings for the composition in his sketchbook. For this purpose I would recommend a large linen-covered book. 15 inches by 12 inches is a good size, and a thick lead pencil. I use a pencil with a loose lead 1/8 of an inch thick, which can be screwed up in the holder when required. Do not attempt to sharpen it to a point. If you wish to get a thin line, use the edge of the lead, but you will seldom need such a line. Touch lightly and in the faintest possible manner the salient features of the subject, the main contours and the position of the masses. This should be the merest suggestion of an outline, and when you are satisfied, draw it in with courage, in big lines, and with a firm, bold touch. Do not hesitate. Include only those things which are important, characteristic, and essential. After some experience you will not stop to think what these things are, for they will come to you by intuition. If you have any doubts, draw all that comes within your view. By practice you will be able to make a drawing in a few minutes which spontaneously indicates the principal parts of your proposed picture. You can carry it a step beyond the mere outline if you like, and add the shading of the broader masses, for you may discover that in pencil work, as in painting, light and shade influence the quality of form. A week or two will do wonders if you practice daily. Have your sketchbook with you at all times, not only when you have a specific object in view, such as that already referred to, but ready for any opportunity that occurs. It should be your constant companion. It is more useful than your color box in the sense that it is more convenient. You can take a note of an interesting cloud formation, the peculiar shape of trees, or some bit of useful foreground, or of the movement of a figure. Draw anything, everything. You may do it badly at first. Never mind. In a week or two you will be surprised at the progress you have made. You will by that time have learned more than you ever knew by previous theorizing, and you will begin to look for better qualities of drawing than you did before. You will construct things better. You will also observe the difference in the growth of the various species of trees, and if you are drawing a cow, you will see that the shoulder is just so far from the head. You will note the correct set of the horns, the peculiar formation of the jaw. Everything, in fact, will have a new interest for you. Your sketchbook should be the receptacle for designs of landscapes, and when, by means of these drawings, you have accumulated the best material and have obtained a satisfactory result, you can then begin your picture with confidence. You will see in the accompanying illustrations from my sketchbook 3 trials for a composition, each of the same spot, but all different. In the first sketch I have placed the trees as they were in nature. In the second I have made an alteration in the distance, and the third is the final composition, which I afterwards painted, but reversed. I recommend you frequently to practice the drawing of trees. Take for example the ash, which is not so difficult as many others. Then proceed to the oak, willow, elm, and poplar. Draw in the landscape so as to get an idea of the composition, and when you are competent, rearrange the material before you to suit the purpose you have in view. Never let anything prevent your drawing a little every day. Draw the intricate hedgerow or the big cloudy sky. It is necessary discipline, and what scales and exercises are to the pianist, so is pencil drawing to the artist. One's hand grows sensitively obedient to the brain, and answers directly to one's power of observation, like the touch of a musician's hand upon the keyboard. He does not stop to calculate the interval which will produce harmony, but obtains it by an instinct which is the result of long practice. And so the artist's hand as naturally expresses what he sees. The delight in the easy and competent expression of form is only surpassed by the delight in the expression of colour, and those two qualities of sensitiveness to form and colour go to the making of a painter. At first you will probably find sketching with the pencil irksome, but the taste for it will grow. In spite of your inclination towards colour, you will learn to love it. So certain will your touch become by persistent practice that you will feel the drawing. You will get that something in the work which lifts it above the merely mechanical imitation, to that higher plane which is instinct with life. In such study you will notice many things that had previously escaped your observation, and instead of making a laboured mess of your pencil drawing, your hand will answer to your eye directly and confidently. The more you know the details of your subject, the greater will be your power to allot to them their due position and their due subordination as you observe them in nature. Wherever you meet a conjunction of fine forms in nature, which are so grouped as to appeal to your sense of style or of decoration, do not miss the opportunity of making a drawing of them. They are not too common. It is not necessary to make a detailed drawing, but sketch in the masses and the main lines of construction, noting how the trunks of the trees support the foliage. Mark the outlines of the branches and their shadows, then draw the principal lines of the landscape and the outlines of the clouds piled above it, and the manner of their shadows. You will thus have obtained the general facts of the character of your scene, and this is the first object of your pencil drawing. The second aim is not of so broad a synthesis. Your object now is not the construction of the design for a picture in which you have to transpose certain things that are not exactly agreeable in their natural position, a change more easily effected in pencil than in paint, but to draw the details of which the masses are composed. You must note all the peculiarities of a tree. Draw its trunk or a section of it, or a small bough with each individual leaf. You will observe the manner in which the branches attach themselves to the trunk, and all the details of its construction, so that you will know how to use the tree in your landscape. The same method applies to other details. That is, in your general sketch the hedge appeared a mere outline, soft at the top and stronger where it came in contact with the earth, but now it must be drawn in all the fullness of its detail. The form of each item which goes to make up the intricate mass must be drawn. Make a careful note of the various individual plants as you may probably want some of them afterwards. This drawing will help you to a better understanding of the color, which as a luxury you may subsequently indulge in. Not only is pencil drawing most excellent practice for the landscape painter, it is also a pleasant means by which a large amount of knowledge may be obtained. You will be surprised how the quality of your line will improve, so that you will be able to convey the maximum of meaning by the minimum of effort. You will find that your pencil will roam over your page, following the contour of the hills and trees with accuracy and feeling. Almost involuntarily you will find the hand answering to your eye. For the etcher this quality is essential, and it is of the greatest possible value to the painter. Pencil drawing, as I have attempted to show, is not only useful to you in your trials for a composition in which you have faced the problem of transposition of forms of nature, but as a means of obtaining studies of materials which will enable you to suggest in the broad masses of your painting the multitude of details which build up its breadth, and in such a way that, although not literally drawn, they are so suggestive that they give one the satisfaction that they are complete. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of The Art of Landscape Painting in Oil Color by Alfred East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5. Composition. Perhaps the most elementary and yet one of the most abstruse qualities of landscape painting is composition. The moment a painter places any arrangement of forms upon his canvas, he makes a composition, and at the same time encounters its difficulties. It is easy to recognize bad composition and easy to avoid what is obviously wrong. But there is a very far cry between what is not bad and what is really distinguished. No one would think of taking nature always just as she is. Even the photographer with his limited power takes the greatest pains in the arrangement of the material before him. The painter with fuller powers has greater responsibilities, and if there be some excuse for the former in consideration of his limitations, there is none for the latter. The problem of composition faces him at the very outset of his work. He may be quite certain of its importance in the other arts, recognizing its claims in music, poetry, and architecture. He may acknowledge that nature has offered fewer suggestions to the sister arts than to the landscape painter, but suggestions of breadth, dignity, and style which she has offered each are necessary to them all. If the painter finds that rare thing in nature the happiest conjunction of the most suitable forms for a great composition, and he appreciates its worth, his appreciation is the proof that he understands what constitutes fine composition. If he cannot discern it in nature, he cannot be expected to venture into that difficult field wherein he assumes the authority to transpose his materials to suit his purposes, and of selecting what he requires for the definite object he may have in view. In the art of composition he accepts the whole of the responsibility of his position for either success or failure. Since composition is an essential in the expression of art, one feels how important a few hints may be, for the landscape painter is surrounded by many pitfalls and snares, and the more he may love nature, the more difficult he may find it to avoid them. Innumerable unessential details, though attractive in themselves, may mean destruction to his composition. The authority to select is not only necessary, but obvious. Therefore a painter must assume that authority to which, as a man, he has an undoubted right. Composition is a convention founded upon wide principles. If it is not yet demonstrated why certain arrangements of form and colour give pleasure and other arrangements give pain, it is not a question for us, but for the scientist. We know that it is so, and therefore, without going into the origin of the pain or pleasure, we must accept the facts as we find them. The finest and most prominent quality is balance. The sense of balance gives one the feeling of satisfaction. There are numberless means by which this may be obtained, each governed by certain conditions. The decorative artist has his special conditions, the architect his, as also in their sphere the poet and musician have theirs. We have to consider what those conditions are which govern landscape painting. This interesting quality of balance can be demonstrated by the steelyard arm, or the illustration of the balance of a pound of lead to a pound of feathers. For example, 2 pounds of lead would balance bulk for bulk. Such a fact is too obvious to arouse one's interest. But the moment the bulk of the one is increased and the bulk of the other diminished, one's interest is instantly stirred, and the question arises as to what difference of material causes the change of dimension. So in the case of the steelyard, the disproportion of weight, of course, determines the placing of the pivot. If that be just, there will be a perfect balance. Now imagine your pound of feathers, large in bulk, to be the clump of trees, and your counterpoint on the other side of your picture to be your pound of lead, that is, an object of a strong and definite value. You recognize at once where the point is in your picture upon which these quantities will swing. That point or pivot is one of the most interesting parts of your composition, because it is the blind spot. There and there only can be placed any accent, such as a figure or figures in one's landscape, which will not disturb the previously arranged composition. Frequently I have composed a landscape without the introduction of a figure, and afterwards, for the sake of scale, for everything in art must be governed by the size of the human figure, it seemed appropriate to introduce one, and I have always found that if the composition was correct, the place for the figure was in the center of the canvas, that is, exactly half-way between its 2 sides, and formed the pivot which I have already described. On the other hand, if you design a picture with the intention of introducing figures, you would not, of course, place them in that position at first, but would so shift the balance of the other objects in the picture, such as the trees, sky forms, etc., as to make the introduction of the figures agreeable, or, in other words, to make the balance just. Now, a few words of practical advice. Beware of equal quantities of light and dark. See that the masses of your dark, such as trees or houses, are not equal in form or area to your masses of light, such as water, sky, or road. See that the dark masses do not divide the picture into 2 equal parts. You will observe that the quantity of space covered by the trees in figure A is equal to that covered by the sky, and not only is there equality of quantity, but more or less equality of form. This will be better understood by turning the sketch upside down. Such faults are frequent and should be most carefully avoided owing to the repetitions of forms in nature. But you will see in this example what not to do. Note that the form of the sky is practically the same as the rounded forms of the trees. This danger great as it is perhaps less marked than the inclination to repeat forms in nature, such as the contours of the branches of the trees and of clouds. The branches of trees offer you an opportunity of falling into the error more easily, since it is more apparent to the casual observer. Before speaking of the smaller forms of nature, let me urge you to be careful, before you touch your canvas with a brush, to see that your big things are right. If they are right, you may be sure the little ones will, more or less, take care of themselves. Therefore, when you have a large canvas before you, the first thing to do is to determine on the scale of the subject you wish to paint. With a piece of charcoal you roughly outline the great masses as described in another chapter, and when you have arranged the masses of your material and found the scale, you decide how much or how little of the field of vision you can include within your canvas, and this can only be done by a number of pencil drawings in your book, or a number of charcoal outlines on your canvas. You have to consider what is the object of painting the subject, whether it be merely to make a copy of the material before you, or so to arrange the material that it will express the emotion nature may have given you. You may elect to paint the large masses of the trees clear of the top of the canvas, or on the contrary you may choose to cut off the tops by permitting them to run out of the picture. These matters are at your discretion. The fineness or poverty of the composition depends upon the discretion used. After having made up your mind how to arrange the big masses of dark and light upon your canvas, you will begin to discern that there are other things which call for consideration. The question of tone, for instance. You will find that the tone of your masses in relation to the tone of your sky plays an important part in the matter. For example, it is easily understood that a small light looks more brilliant when in close contact with a deep tone than if it were surrounded by tones of the same value, although the color might be different. The composition, therefore, may have to be modified through the darkness or lightness of the sky or the contours of its forms. I find it better to paint the contours of my sky forms to suit the contours of my landscape. You must always bear in mind that every contour in your composition is gauged by the right angle of your canvas and the edge of your picture, and in relation to these lines should be the expression of the curves. These contours have an essential purpose to serve, insomuch that they must express the nature of the material. They should also be big in feeling and noble in design. I have pointed out that the curvature of any line is immediately seen by comparison to the edge of your canvas, and it will be understood that the scale of your picture will also be governed by it. For example, a number of small curves do not convey the same sense of dignity and style as large ones, if they be fine. You see that in the landscape by Rubens in the Pitti Gallery. See Landscape Facing, page 39. This picture conveys no sense of style. It is all frittered away by several small incidents, each attracting the eye and not helping the general effect of the whole. How different is that by Corot! There we see but one intention expressed, and the introduction of the figures adds to the value of that intention. You see in the former no sense of balance, while in the latter this feeling is so delicate that one touch more of dark or light would destroy its charm. In this illustration by Corot, one sees the application of the general principle I have spoken of in the introduction to this chapter. But here let me warn the young landscape painter against the imitation of the masters. A young man once said to me that he was in great distress about forming a style, that when he went out on a misty morning he thought of Corot, and if the morning were breezy he remembered Constable. I said, "Why don't you remember yourself? Aren't you a man? That is what I want you to remember. And I say it again, at the risk of repetition, you are to work in the spirit of the old masters and not in the letter. I do not want you to compose all your canvases like Corot because I point out to you one of his qualities which stands out in contrast to the absence of that quality in Rubens. I would advise you to study the work of Claude in his Liber Veritatis, better still Turner's Liber Studiorum. That master, who, whatever his materials were, always presented to you a noble composition. And then, if there is anything in you, you will form your own style. The study of the works of these great men will help you to a better understanding of the great importance of composition. Each had his own personal way of looking at nature, although their modes of expression were different, but they were one in the great principles that underlay their art. I should like to encourage you to cultivate the force and personal qualities which these men possessed. And if you have sufficient knowledge, you, like Turner, could transpose your materials. If you have not, do not try, for you will come to grief. The removal of a tree, or the diversion of a road, or the rearrangement of any smaller details will give you trouble, and that is a proof you do not know enough of the principles of composition. One overlooks many little personal peculiarities and falsities in great work if the essentials are right, and I would impress upon you the necessity for bearing this fact in mind, that if the essentials are wrong, no matter how beautifully the details are painted, the picture cannot be a fine work of art. Your business is to express big thoughts, big ideas, by big means, and it is possible to do so without the sacrifice of truth to nature. There is no reason why you should lose the characteristics of the particular tree you are painting because you make its contour finer or remove it to another place. Trees differ as much in personal character as men. You will find noble forms and mean ones. They are at your option. If you paint a mean one which is not suitable to your purpose, simply because it grows in the same vicinity as the other material you are sketching, it is because you have not the power to alter it, or are too lazy to attempt it. Either thing is enough to ruin your work. Let me ask you to look at nature with wide eyes, a large appreciation, and a broad, generous, and synthetic outlook. And if you cannot express the splendor of her dignity and the breadth of her repose, you may still do more than the man who thinks a pretty hedgerow or a moss-grown cottage all sufficient for a noble landscape. Having spoken of the larger qualities of composition, let me point out to you some minor considerations, the aggregate of which should assist you to build up a picture. You may have rhythm, but be careful lest your rhythm degenerate into repetition. Do not let alliteration of form be obvious. Alliteration is a distinctly charming quality in composition, but it is a dangerous one in the hands of the ignorant. Look to your angles, that they do not become too dominant. There are fewer things so telling in composition as a right angle. And remember that the moment you paint anything, you at the same time form the shape of something else. And in any large quantity of dark, you have in a measure defined the shape of the area of the light. You may see in the works of Ruysdael and of other old Dutch painters the most sincere effort to paint every leaf on the tree, a sincerity worthy of a better cause. Notice the constant repetition of forms, and not only the repetition of the form of leaf, but what interests us more at the moment, the repetition of their branches. You may see that Claude and Poussin did this, which gave their trees an air of unreality. It was not till Turner came and explained the matter that we saw in art the happening of nature. As the method of painting trees will be dealt with in a separate chapter, I shall speak only of trees as material in composition. I will only point out to you that the repetition of branch form of the same quantity and contour is to be avoided. Remember the value of the human figure in composition. A small figure will alter the balance of your composition much more than a larger surface of any inanimate object. Its weight in the balance of your composition is out of proportion to its size. Even a large tree would not upset the balance of the composition so much. A small light surrounded by darks has a much greater weight than a larger light in contact with a lighter tone, and a small dark on light has a greater effect than a larger light superimposed upon a half tone. Each touch either of light or dark forms a portion of your composition, and should be essential, for what does not really help must be a drawback. A fine design is that which the slightest alteration will spoil. An inch in a canvas of 24 square feet is sufficient to destroy the balance of its parts, and a good composition cannot be added to or subtracted from. It is complete. If it has given you a good deal of trouble and necessitated your making many studies, it is worth while for the satisfaction of feeling that it is well done. There are painters whose works depend entirely upon the colour. They ignore the quality of composition for the sake of some minor truths. Believe me, when the colour goes, as it must in the course of years, there will be nothing left to speak of its excellence. If there is no beauty of design, then the value of the picture as a work of art will be lost. Composition is one of the greatest qualities in art. It makes all the difference between a fine work and a mean one. I will attempt by means of a few illustrations to convey more clearly what I mean. Figure C will convey no sense of composition, but the moment other forms cross one of the masses in the form of tree trunks and clothe them with foliage, you produce an effect as in Figure D, which is not unpleasant. But you see you must introduce other forms to balance this addition, so you may feel your way to what is right. Then with the correction of line and the addition of clouds you have a balance which we call composition. Examples might be repeated constantly. One may suffice, which is the reverse of the example above. In this the objects are not at each side, but in the centre of the canvas. This, as you see, is important, as the distances from A to B and C to D are equal, and the distances from E to F and G to H are equal. This is not right. The bulk of the trees and the distance from the edge of the canvas are the same. You may say to yourself, What am I to do in this case? Can I put a dark sky in one side and light in the other? Or can I put some trees and show the distance in the other? Which would be better? You make the experiment with this result, figure F, and may paint a large tree to the right or left of your picture, which destroys the sense of equal distribution. The painter can raise or lower this or that as he feels his picture requires it. And when he has done this, he might take his mirror and see what that most impartial friend says of his design. If it still holds good reversed, I think he may be satisfied that it is correct. Some of the forms of landscape composition may be described as triangular, circular, or convergent, but one does not think to what order any composition belongs if it be good. Remember that no spaces must be equal between the masses, or between the masses and the edge of the frame, that the lines should be in harmony as well as the masses. I mean that the swing of the outline of the tree or any object should not be needlessly interrupted, that the great mass of darks should not be placed in sudden opposition to the lights, but should be broken by half-tones. The sense of breadth and harmony is thus secured. But where you wish to produce a very strong effect, such as a storm, the hardness is modified by the dark sky. One cannot throw over all the rules of composition without seeing instantly there is something wrong, and until you can detect such errors, you cannot hope to make a noble design. You must also think of the quality of your material before you think of its disposition. Thus elms and oaks have a different effect to black poplars, the first strong, the latter soft. Bear in mind your linear as well as your aerial perspective. In your composition, your lines should be sympathetic, and when they are not pleasant in nature and have a soft and sleepy feeling, the refreshment can be obtained by a dark or light, but more frequently by the addition of an opposing line which should be led up to with great discretion and care. A picture of a flat country can be made into a good composition by the inclusion of a big sky, and so hundreds of examples of the importance of composition might be cited, including the drastic method of cutting your picture down, or adding a piece to it, a measure which you should not hesitate to adopt when all other means fail. But do not do this impulsively. Cover the parts to be cut with strips of brown paper till you get the exact proportion of parts. Then get a new stretcher made to the size. Cutting down is a last resource, and should not be done unless the result would be a distinct gain, but it is sometimes necessary. You may have painted your picture in too small a manner. The reduction of its size will then increase the sense of scale. You have, for example, painted your mountain in an alpine subject too low in the picture, a common fault, and you feel it gives no sense of the height you wish to convey. It is too well painted for you to tinker with it, and yet something must be done. By cutting a piece off the sky, you at once give a sense of height to the mountain. To improve your composition, your picture may require an increase of size. Such an alteration is invariably made at the top, but it is a more difficult matter to add to a canvas than to cut it down. An addition means relining, which brings many difficulties in its train, and should be carefully considered before such a step is taken. I would almost go so far as to say that it would be better to repaint it than resort to this. There are so many interesting problems in composition that it would require more space than I have at my disposal to describe them, the bearing of one thing upon another, the relative influence of lights and darks apart from the sentiment of the picture. But this may be said of the art of composition, that it is one of the most interesting, though it may be the most difficult problem for the painter. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Art of Landscape Painting in Oil Color by Alfred East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6. Color. What is color? We understand well enough the general meaning of the term, but cannot easily frame a definition. Some day, perhaps, color will be defined as chemical compounds are, and described quantitatively, a definite figure being employed for a definite tone. At present our definitions are loose, and we cannot explain the exact measure and meaning of our words when we speak of color. We ought to have such definitions as will leave no doubt in the reader's mind as to the tone the writer refers to, and we should associate the exact tone of a color with an accepted symbol. We call yellow yellow, yet there are 100 tones of yellow, from the most brilliant suggestions of light to the deep hue which lies at the borderland of red. We have no names for these except light or dark, and very weak epithets they are, and absolutely worthless to the artist. We say a sky is blue. It may be so, but you would frequently be inclined to call it green were a fragment of that pigment held up for comparison. In the works of eminent painters we see the sky painted in a fashion that suggests all the qualities of atmosphere, distance, the sense of infinity, etc. Yet if we were to compare it with nature, we should find that the picture which gave these revelations was painted many degrees lower in tone than the actual sky. So again with red. It may be sumptuous, full, rich, expressive of dignity and power, or it may be poor, mean, and unworthy of its place, yet we call it red in either case. On one side it may coalesce with a blazing scarlet, or descend the purple slope towards blue. If this indefiniteness occurs in the primary pigments, what shall we say of the secondary and tertiary ones, with their infinite range of subtle greys? It would be an impossible task to follow and describe them. It is not within the capacity of the human mind to do so. We use names which are, after all, but approximations to the real facts. Color cannot be expressed without a medium or without the assistance of form, yet it has a quality independent of either. It is the significant beauty of a pearl, yet, strange to say, it is of little value when the same lovely iridescence is shown in a meaner material. We lose a vast amount of the enjoyment of life in the non-appreciation of color in its infinite varieties and combinations. There are within our minds associations of sentiment with color. For example, red calls up the ideas of force, cruelty, or passion. Purple speaks of dignity and regal splendor, and blue of purity, and so on. But for all that, it has not been discovered what form or shape best serves for their display, and if the most expressive form, let us say of red, be made, it may lose or modify its meaning through contact with its complementary. There is a wide field of unexplored thought in the question of color and its bearing upon the emotions through art, but it is too abstruse for a book of this character. It is sufficient for our purpose to insist that the student should recognize that there is as much artistic thought necessary to the selection of color from nature as there is in the selection of form, and that no color should be allied with form if by such alliance that form should lose its special characteristic. Our nerves may be as irritated by a series of tones of color in a bad picture as our ears would be by the discord of tones in music. We speak of good or bad color. These terms are entirely relative and conditional. No doubt color qua color may be good or bad, but from the painter's point of view, its quality is determined by its suitability to the purpose in hand. The artist has the whole gamut of color at his disposal for his own selection. If his selection is bad, he must not complain that he has not had the opportunity of choice. It would be equally absurd if the musician complained of the quality of sounds or the author of the nature of words. Great thoughts have been expressed by simple terms, and great pictures painted with a simple palette. I mention this matter because I want to warn you that no excuse is valid for the misuse of color. You cannot come back puling from a misspent month of work and say you never had a chance. You have had chances as good as any of the greatest painters ever had. It is entirely your own fault if you select color that is common or mean. Some people see only the sordid elements in life and nature. They seize only the non-essential things, which nature would almost seem to display in contrast with the truly great. Philistine painters, mistaking these for the inner realities, and being oblivious of true place and proportion, reproduce them, and leave the characteristic things undone. So with color. They see the obvious and superficial. They do not see what is distinguished and fine. Unfortunately, their appeal to nature for justification is allowed by those who see her with the same meanness of vision. The appreciation of color is undoubtedly a rare gift. With it a man can become a great painter. Without it he cannot possibly claim a position amongst them. One can cultivate this faculty if it is inborn, and develop it to a higher plane, but if it is absent, it cannot be created any more than you can create an ear for music. It is a well-known fact that faculties become atrophied by disuse, and exercise is necessary for the retention of natural gifts. It is said that Darwin, who used to practice music in his early days, completely lost all sense of it after a long period of life devoted to scientific pursuits. He could not tell the difference between God Save the Queen and Rule Britannia. You perceive, therefore, it is equally necessary, if we wish to keep the color sense keen, to constantly sharpen that faculty by close observation and comparison of colors in nature, learning to select those that will be most consistent with our purpose. The vulgar craftsman will give you the rough, primitive colors that are seen by the crowd, but the disciplined eye perceives the qualifying effect of many different local conditions, yet never loses the truth amid these modifications. You have admired the beauty and subtle color of the landscapes by Kazin. You cannot say for certain what proportions of yellow or blue composed his green. You cannot detect the particular pigment in his delicate grays, but you instantly recognize that he has seen these tints in nature, and that his representation is just and beautiful. You conclude that they are arrived at through a refined and artistic temperament, not the coarse and vulgar ignorance that paints blue, blue, or green, green, and leaves no message beyond the impression that the hand that painted was the hand of a boor. The lesson to you is this: while exercising care in the selection of your subject, its composition, and the effect under which you will paint it, you must think, and think seriously, of this vital question of color. It is a question of the first importance, and probably the most profound of all the difficulties you have to encounter. If you are a colorist by nature, the time and thought you devote to the subject will not be wasted. Naturally, by thought, you will add something to the fineness of your gift. If you have but a poor appreciation of color, it is all the more necessary to seek improvement by painstaking and persistent study. It has been said, and said with truth, that if you look for any particular color in nature, you will find it. If you search for purple, you will discover purple, and if you want blue, the blue will be sure to show itself. This curious and interesting fact in psychology accounts for the preponderance of certain colors in some artists' landscapes, a specific strain, as it were, running through them all, as particular notes in a musical fugue. We know a man's work by his predilection for a certain color, yet the artist himself may be completely ignorant of the peculiarity. It is possible you may become color sick, that is, lose your quick appreciation of color. The only remedy is resolutely to exclude the offending pigment from your box, and to force yourself to paint the subject without it. It will be difficult and almost painful at first. You will be trying incessantly to find it on your palette, but persevere until you have conquered this abnormal tendency. Then, when you are so master of it, you may indulge yourself with a little of the forbidden color as a luxury. The raison d'être of painting, in contradistinction to the other arts, is the expression of color, or rather the expression of color allied with form. It is a laborious task to secure some of the higher qualities of tone when using a full polychromatic palette. It has been done by Turner, even if at the expense of other artistic qualities. But do not allow any difficulties to drive you to seek that refuge of the destitute, painting in monochrome. It is obviously easy to obtain qualities of tone in black and white. It is true we may even suggest color in black and white, and there are artists who claim to suggest color by a monochromatic scheme. But do they succeed? That is a question I would ask you seriously to consider. They paint black or brown trees and a gray sky made of flake white and ivory black, and they perhaps insert a spot of color in the figure of an animal or man. Now, had you not received the suggestion through the form of the trees that they were trees, do you think you would feel they were green? I think not. You think they are green because you know by their form they are trees. If the mass had not assumed the shape of trees, you would not have arrived at the conception of any color, but would only have perceived their blackness. The suggestion is offered, and you accept it, your intellect coming to the rescue of your sensation by a process of deduction. Were all art so colorless, what a monotony it would be, and life minus color, flowers, skies, seas, costumes, pageants, reduced to a dull monochrome, would become a dreariness indeed. It behooves us, therefore, not to shirk the difficulties of color, but so to use it that it becomes a pleasure, for the appreciation of colour is one of the joys of life, one of its greatest charms. It is our duty to cultivate this faculty, so to understand its value that we may reveal its beauty to others, and which many, in their hurry of life, may have missed. The greatest landscape is marked by the alliance of fine form with fine colour. Colour that is harmonious and just will always possess beauty. Forms should be enhanced and glorified by colour, and colour in turn should be ennobled by being enshrined in the most appropriate forms. It is said that one of the old masters declared that he would paint the head of the Madonna with mud if he were given colour to put around it. End of chapter 6.